The summer of 1940 was Britain's darkest hour. With mainland Europe overrun by Nazi Germany and the British Expeditionary Force barely rescued from the beaches of Dunkirk, the nation stood alone, its army nearly disarmed. An invasion, codenamed Operation Sea Lion, seemed inevitable. The country's only shield was the Royal Air Force, but even this was a force in flux. While a mix of older biplanes and the more rugged Hawker Hurricanes were ready for the fight, the RAF's newest and most promising fighter, the Supermarine Spitfire, was a scarce and precious resource. Initially, commanders were reluctant to commit the Spitfires, preserving them for what they believed would be the final, decisive battle. But when the Luftwaffe turned its full force on Britain's airfields, factories, and cities, that caution ended, and the Spitfire was sent into the fray. A constantly evolving arsenal, the Spitfire's iconic design, with its elliptical wing, was a triumph of aerodynamics. This unique shape gave it incredible lift and low drag, allowing it to turn tighter than most of its opponents, a critical advantage in close-quarters dogfights. Yet, despite its brilliant airframe, the Spitfire was initially hampered by an imperfect armament. The original plan was to equip each plane with 8.303 caliber Browning machine guns. However, a specific design modification for the RAF caused a critical flaw. The guns fired from an open bolt to prevent the cordite propellant from igniting prematurely, a feature that worked well on the ground. But at the frigid, high altitudes of combat, cold air rushing through the barrels would freeze the internal mechanisms, causing the guns to jam. Pilots would find themselves in the heat of a battle with a fully functional fighter but silent weapons. Beyond the freezing issue, the .303 rounds themselves proved underwhelming. They lacked the stopping power needed to bring down larger or more rugged German aircraft. On average, it took a staggering 4,500 rounds to down a single enemy plane. With only 350 rounds per gun, a pilot had a mere 15 seconds of total firing time before running out of ammunition. Recognizing the need for a more powerful punch, engineers began experimenting with 20mm Hispano cannons. These were a major upgrade, but the initial modifications were far from perfect. The cannons were mounted sideways in the wings with large drum magazines, which limited ammunition capacity and created bulky aerodynamic blisters that compromised the plane's performance. The cannons also jammed frequently, creating new problems for pilots. It was through a painstaking and iterative process of redesigning the feed mechanism and repositioning the guns that the Hispano cannon eventually became a reliable, and devastating, part of the Spitfire's arsenal, often paired with 4 of the original .303 machine guns. The Merlin engine's critical flaw at the heart of the Spitfire was the incredible Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. It was a marvel of engineering that put out over 1,000 horsepower and had a clever design feature: it pulled fuel into a carburetor before it hit the supercharger, and the evaporation of the fuel cooled the intake air, making the engine more efficient at high altitudes. This gave the Spitfire a significant advantage in climbing and level flight. However, the carburetor system also hit a critical flaw. In a steep dive, a common maneuver for pursuing an enemy negative G-forces would either flood the carburetor or starve it completely, causing the engine to stall. German pilots in their fuel-injected Messerschmitt Bf 109s could dive away cleanly and quickly, leaving their British pursuers helpless. Pilots learned a risky workaround of rolling their plane upside down before a dive, but a permanent solution was desperately needed. The answer came from engineer Beatrice Schilling. She designed a simple, elegant device, a metal washer known informally as Miss Schilling's orifice. It was a tiny piece of metal that fit into the carburetor's fuel line, restricting the flow and preventing it from being overwhelmed by pressure. It was a stopgap solution, but it was effective, and it allowed Spitfires to finally chase their targets into a dive without losing power. The Spitfires' global campaign after the Battle of Britain, the Spitfires' war was far from over. It continued to evolve, receiving more powerful versions of the Merlin engine and, later, the massive Rolls-Royce Griffon engine, which pushed its power output past 2,000 horsepower. The aircraft's role expanded from defense to offense, flying missions over the European continent, and facing off against new and more formidable German fighters like the Focke-Wulf 190. The Spitfire even took to the seas as the Seafire, a navalized version with an arrestor hook and folding wings. The Spitfire's narrow landing gear and unique design made carrier landings notoriously difficult, but it provided the Royal Navy with a crucial high-performance fighter. In the Pacific, the Spitfire faced its final great challenge, the highly agile Japanese Zero. The Zero could outturn the Spitfire in a close-quarters fight, so Allied pilots adapted. They used the Spitfire's superior speed and diving power to employ hit-and-run tactics, striking hard and fast before climbing away, a strategy that proved devastatingly effective against the Zero's thin armor. The Spitfire was one of the few fighters to remain in continuous production before, during, and after the war. Its story is not just one of a brilliantly designed aircraft, but of a machine that was constantly improved and adapted to meet every new challenge the war threw at it, becoming an enduring symbol of national resilience and ingenuity.